if the market is manipulated, and I'm talking precious metals here, what's the point of being in it? How do you invest in a market that's manipulated? Why should I be in silver?
Yeah, I think, there's a few people like myself of the view that, eventually this system's going to crack and it's like an elastic band, it's been held down for so long and eventually it's just going to snap. Supply demand fundamentals for silver are just astronomical. I was looking at some automobile stats just the other day and the demands for this metal is just, absolutely outstanding and or crazy. And we can talk a little bit about numbers if you want, but I just think that the supply demand fundamentals to the silver itself are just going to get so overwhelmed that it'll break any bank that wants to be on the short side. There's a huge supply problem. And, I've been in discussions with many mints and I don't want to be naming names on the air, but, I know who these mints are and I know they're absolutely the end of their wits. They just can't supply the demand that's currently out there. And, we see it now showing up at the U.S. Mint.
Why do you think there's such a hunger for silver?
Well, I think people are waking up. My thesis, and you and I have had many, many talks under your prior, company, and there is a big dispute out there. Well, how much demand is there actually, and how much silver is actually sitting on the surface of the earth, and what are the supply demand fundamentals? And I was looking at the auto industry just the other day, and it's interesting. There's about 1.4 billion cars sitting on the surface of the earth. Last year, the stats, there was 2.4 million electric automobiles produced in a marketplace of just slightly shy of 100 million cars per year. So that's only 2.5 million electric cars of the 100 million. Now, Volkswagen, General Motors, all these automobile manufacturers are all claiming that they're going to stop producing fuel combustion cars. Cities are now talking about preventing fuel combustion cars to drive their streets by whatever date. Different cities are coming up with different dates. So this 2.4 million electric cars that are currently being produced is going to be a much, much bigger number. It's got to be in the tens of millions of cars a year just to meet these regulatory changes that are coming right in front of our eyes. So how much silver is that's going to consume? It's going to be in the hundreds of millions of ounces of silver. And when you're looking at a market, the miners are only producing 800 million ounces of silver a year. The solar industry is already taking over 100 million. Some numbers are as high as 200 million ounces in 2020. We don't know what the number is. So you've got two industries that are going to likely take half the world's supply of silver. What does that tell you about prices? The retail investor is kind of the marginal investor. They do kind of come and go. But interestingly enough, if you go back and look at 2011, that big spike from the $20 range to the $50 range, that was investor demand. That was big hedge funds, that was retail investor demand, and so on, and of course, then we had a short squeeze, which took it from 40 to 50. But that whole run from 20 to 35 was all investor demand. This time around, we're seeing investor demand, of course, we all know about it, but we're seeing commercial demand at the same time, which is new in the industry.
Interesting. Okay, so it's the newness here for you is commercial demand plus the investment demand that we haven't seen in, would you say, forever, Keith?
I think since the 80s, really, when the photographic industry kind of came offline and there was a bunch of supply left behind with no real buyer. And then computers came into being, in the 80s and then into the 90s and started gobbling up the supply. And now we've got, 30, 40 years of, pretty impressive demand, and there's just simply not enough silver around anymore. I think people are waking up to the fact that, governments are just out of control, printing money, debasing currencies. And I think there's a view out there that there's something afoot, and no one really knows what it is, because, the IMF, every once in a while puts out a couple of messages here and there. And, the variety of banks here and there, talk about, different types of resetting, what is is the U.S. going to lose their reserve currency status? All these kinds of things get floated in the marketplace, and we see the headlines. We're all in the mining sector, so we all read the same stuff. None of us really know what the financial situation is going to look like, 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. But people are preparing for this change. We just don't know when it's going to happen. I felt like I was quite alone, 5 some odd years ago, because I did. When I put First Majestic together 18 years ago, I was expecting $50 silver, and it happened. It took 10 years, mind you. I didn't think it was going to take 10 years, but I didn't ever expect that silver prices were going to drop from $50 and go all the way back down to 13. That surprised me. But as a result of my view and the supply-demand fundamentals of the metal, and the fact that I look at silver as a very strategic metal, of course it's precious and it's and so on, but I look at it better. I think it's better than gold, because gold is great. It's the granddaddy of all currency. I think gold should be in everyone's portfolio, but silver is an extremely unique metal. Everything that we're doing as a human race requires silver. This call itself would not be possible without silver. People are waking up to that, and I think it's just going to have this enormous impact on price. When we see that, I don't know when it's going to happen, but I would expect to see that, whether it's the auto industry, whether it's the electronic industry, whatever industry may be, they're going to have to stop producing whatever product they're producing today, because they can't get supply. And the second that happens, there's going to be huge demand coming into this marketplace. And the industry is so paranoid. I've said that, you've heard me say this before, but it's such a secretive industry. The big consumers, the auto manufacturers, the electronic manufacturers, they don't want us as investors to know how much metal they actually use. So the 3 service providers out there, CPM, Market Metals Focused, and GFMS, they make up their numbers, because they have no clue how much silver Toyota consumes or Tesla consumes. They just make these numbers up. I think they're completely understated. If we found out how tight this market was is actually today, metal prices would go up 200-300%, and the Samsungs of the world would completely freak out. And they're trying to prevent that from happening. But at the end of the day, it wouldn't matter. Like a Samsung 12 or whatever, I think that's this newest Samsung, was a Samsung 20 S20. It's only got about $5 worth of silver in it anyway. So if silver's $200 an ounce, that phone's going to be what, an extra $20? Who cares? But these manufacturers don't want us to know. What's your target on gold? 3,000, 5,000, Rickards, it's called 10,000 or 20,000, whatever the number is. But, even at 3,000, that's only 50% increase. 5,000, that's, basically a little bit of over a double, right? 125% or whatever. Silver at $100, that's 400%, $150. I'm more convinced than ever. I just think that, you combine the what's happening with governments, the money printing, the fact that it is a precious metal, so people do look at silver like gold, even though I don't really look at them the same. But just the supply-demand fundamentals of the metal are just over the top. I wouldn't be surprised to see a 10-year bull market coming up.